Hi, welcome. My name is Elise Lovejoy. I am the owner and founder of Express Readers, a TK through second grade foundational skills in reading program, as well as a series of decodable books, the Express Readers books. And we are so excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you will like this first decodable webinar. Let's get started. It's the first in a series of 7. So let's get started. We are kicking off the Decodable Book webinar series with Let's Get Started. This will hopefully help you understand what decodable books are, how to use them, how to pick them. I have been lucky enough to be a part of a community of decodable book authors who are incredible educators and parents and people that have started writing decodable books as they saw the need. So, luckily, I get to share their books in my teaching today. So, let's get started. This is what we're going to go over. We're going to go over what is a decodable book. We're going to talk about which decodable books you need, not by specific series, but by content or setup. We're going to do. I have my decodable books now. What? So now you've chosen and you decided which ones you want and need, and now what do you do with them? So what is a decodable book? We're going to define it. We're going to talk about decodable books alongside of leveled readers. We're going to talk about decodability and the research that's currently available. So basically, a decodable book is a book that a child has the skills to read. So it's the phonics structures, it is the sight words that they already know. Most decodable books have a handful of sight words or words that can't be decoded yet or have irregular spellings. And the reason for this is that in order to make a story or make something make sense or be engaging, you often need a couple of words that are high frequency that kids can't decode. But a decodable book is based around the skill sets that a child already has. So, the basics. What's a decodable book? Well, we have the letters. Here's your alphabet. You've got 26 letters, all the consonants. Most children in the first stages of learning learn the basic sound spellings for the consonants. So you've got the basic sound spellings here. And when I say basic, I mean the most used or the ones that are found in the easiest words. So the least amount of letters. So we often talk about CVC words. So it's a consonant, vowel, consonant. And so we talk about the sounds that you would find made spelled by the letters there. So this is something from a grapheme map that I had made a while back. And it is shows the percentage with which that spelling makes that sound. So we do teach C as k, although it makes other sounds, it spells other sounds, we do teach it as k to begin with. So here we've got the basic sounds. You'll see letters like Q and X, they make more than one sound, so they're often later in a scope and sequence. And then we've got vowel sounds, or the vowels. And most programs begin with the short vowel sound because it's easier spelling. It's the most common found in small words. And this isn't to say that we don't introduce or we don't explain what the long vowel sounds are, but as far as in a systematic, explicit teaching, we would teach the vowels as short vowel sounds first. So, taking all of those, then this is how we begin with our decodable books. We will add on more complex phonics structures as we go, but this would be done systematically. It would be done, you would be reading books that had the ones you had already learned in them. So here I'm going to give you an example. This is a book by Phonics Books, and it's Sam, Tam, and Tim. If I'm looking at this book, I can see on the back, these are the sounds that I need to know the basic spellings of. So I would need to know s, a, t, I, in order to decode the words that are in this book. This is one by Align Decodables. And in this book, you would need to know these specific consonants and these short vowel sounds. So if I was currently working on short U, I wouldn't be using this book. I need to look at what's in the books and then choose a book based on that. So if I have the short vowels a, e, I, o, u, ah, I would use this book as a great way to practice decoding using those sounds. This is one by Express Readers. Now you'll see the difference is that in this one you need all the short vowels, and we're doing CVC words, so you would need the consonants as well. Basically learning how to look at these decodable books and decide what it is that you need to have taught or your kids need to be learning at that time. This is a scope and sequence. It's just one, it's ours. But what I want to show you is that the way that we set up decodable books is in a decodable book within a scope and sequence, you will be reading a book that has the phonics they're working on and everything from before it. So when we talk about a scope and sequence, it's something that builds. It's something where you are scaffolding so kids continue to practice the skills that came before, but that now they are practicing specifically for a skill that they're learning. So if you are doing step 5 and you're doing long vowel teams, you will need to know all of this before. Seems like a lot, but over the years of teaching or over the year of teaching, depending on what your structure is, uh, kids kids will then find success using the new phonic structures you're teaching. So here is leveled reading is or leveled readers are something that a lot of us have used in our classrooms. I was trained using leveled readers, and I want to make very clear that books all have a place. Within schools, within homes, within libraries, they all have a place. And stories are wonderful for children. But when we talk about specific purposes, we really need to look at the materials we're using with our students. So a leveled reader was developed based on the number of words, the complexity of the sentence, sometimes by the subject matter that's involved in it, but decodable books were based on the composition of the actual words. So when we're asking children to practice using the skills that they have based on words and sound spellings, a decodable book is a great place to practice reading using those skills. Now, here's a leveled reader. Um, these are pears, these are bananas, these are grapes. This would be a great way to go over sentence structure, how many words are in sentence. But at being leveled at an a child might know the basic letter sounds, like when we went over the alphabet before. They might know the basic sounds spelled by the alphabet. In that case, not one of these words is decodable. So it depends on what I'm asking of the student. If I am asking them to read the words, this might not be the place I ask them to practice. This is a really cute book, Emmett and the Bright Blue Cape. Um, but this is also a level 1. So if I'm asking a child to read the actual words that are in that book, this is how many words they can actually decode. It points to what are we asking of students? This is an example I'll use. If you went to the gym, oh, it's your first time or maybe your second time, and you're going to the gym and the trainer looks you up and down and says, okay, based on your age and your weight, these are the heavy dumbbells you should be able to lift. And you're standing among, all the lifters, all the bodybuilders or whatever it may be, people who are a little better at it than you. Anyhow, you're standing there with all of them. How are you going to feel? Because you might not have the skills or the muscles to do that yet. So by putting this in front of a child and saying, you have to read this, that's one thing. Now, my house has a lot of books in it that my kids can't actually read using their skill set, but I read those books to my kids by allowing our kids to have access to all kinds of books, we're allowing them to love reading because the love for reading starts before a child can ever do it themselves. We're showing them what they can read when they gain those skills. But a leveled reader in general, as a requirement for um, practice for a child to read, is is a difficult place. And this is another reason why. This is from one of the bigger publishing companies, and it explains level A. It says that it's highly supported by pictures. what is meant by that is that the text is supported. So if they can't figure out the actual text, they can use the pictures. There's repeating language patterns. Well, patterns allow for a child to repeat something again and again and again. So they're not necessarily reading the words, they're saying it from memory. Predictable sentences, if you predict something, you make an educated guess. So you are guessing based on what you know. Predicting is a way to look at a text, but it is not the way that you read it. Um, and strongly sight word based. So, as I said before, sight words most often are words that can't be decoded yet or have an irregular spelling. So, if there's a lot of those in a book, it's not going to be very easy for the child to actually access that text. With leveled readers, the difficulty comes in that if these are the ways we are asking children to read a book, we are not asking them to attend to the text or the sound spellings or phonics structures in that text. So, what is decodability and does it matter? Decodability is basically a percentage of how many words in that book the student can read. It is taken by taking how many words are decodable based on a certain skill set and dividing it by how many words are in the book. And then you get your percentage. It's based on a scope and sequence. So when we look at this is a book from our step 3. It has digraphs in it. If the child is or student, I should say student, I apologize. If the student is can read basic sound spellings from the alphabet, they can read 50% of this. So a little bit difficult. But if at the scope and sequence where this book is put, they can read CVC, blends, digraphs, they can read 83% of this book using the skills that they have. This is going to drive kids to actually use what we're teaching them in phonics and in the structures in class in the reading that they do. This is a book by Simple Words Books, and this is also extremely decodable at a basic level. So this will be a book that I might use with a child who is still practicing skills, but is maybe further along in years. Um, Now, if they only know the basic letter spellings, they'd only be able to read 26% of this book. But if they know blends, digraphs, and basic letter spellings, they can read 70% of this book, which allows them to practice the things that they're learning. So we've discussed what it is, but does it matter? Yes, it does matter. But we need to be very cognizant of a couple of things. So the biggest is which words are not decodable. So if we've got this, I give you an example right here. It has some simple sentences and it has a couple of sight words that the kids wouldn't be able to read. Nothing terrible. Um, and 72% of it is decodable. But there are 9 new words. Here we've got one that's 76% decodable and there are 4 new words. If you look at the difference and the load that you're going to have to front load for a child in order for them to read that book, it's a lot more. It's a bit more daunting when you're looking at having to um, uh, remember by heart 9 words versus 4. Also, looking at the words that are the main word or that play heavily into the meaning. So if it's a word that is going to be difficult for them to identify and it's something that's going to give them the meaning of the story, we want to be cognizant of that. And this example might look familiar to some of you. It is like a pattern text. A lot of it is decodable, 76% decodable. But what you'll see is that that last word, um, it most likely needs a picture or it needs the pattern. So kids stop decoding 10 cats can because they've heard it again and again and again. It's not a great practice for practicing all the decodable skills they have. That being said, there is something for repeated reading. There's a lot of studying going on how that helps kids with fluency and how it helps them with the automaticity of word recognition as far as once we've learned a phonics structure. So I'm not saying that repeated reading isn't an effective practice. I'm saying that when we are practicing their decoding and blending skills based on their skill set, this is a difficult. one. So you'll hear a lot that state standards say that the decodable text should be between 75% and 80% decodable. But really we need to, as the professionals, as the educators, as the parents, be looking at what is not decodable in a book. So this brings us to the research. And you might have heard this as well. There is not a huge amount of research in our field on what is a decodable book, or on the effectiveness of decodable books. There's actually a lot more from a long time ago, from the 1990s, based in when phonics was the central piece in how we were teaching reading. And as we moved away from that, there wasn't as much research. And a lot of the research that was done didn't have very large study sizes, they weren't peer reviewed. And so it is difficult because, especially in a realm where I think it's so important that we look to the evidence and the research, we need to also take what we know and do the best that we can with it. Um, but what all this points to is that when we are doing phonics instruction, kids need to be applying those skills in order to master them and become automatic. And also that the way that we ask children to read in the early parts is the way that they're going to read later. So if I'm asking them to look at the words and to focus on the text and to use the skills that I've taught them in order to read, that's going to be how they're going to approach text moving forward. But if I'm constantly putting them in positions where they have to guess, where there are lots of words that they can't use their skills, or where they're not getting to practice what I'm teaching them, they're going to use the skills of a struggling reader, which is guessing or making predictions based on meaning or what comes next, instead of using the actual words. What we do know is there's a lot of research about how um, people learn how to read, how that works in the brain, what 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 is the composition of a, or what does a brain look like for a strong reader? What does it look like for a struggling reader? And so when I say we have to take what we know and do the best, what I'm aiming at is that when we look at the brain and we understand the various parts, understanding that we need to know that words are made up of sounds, then eventually we can pull those sounds apart or put them together, and we can identify the spellings that are connected to each one of those. And then we start taking it down in the occipital lobe into what we now call the letter box. It's where your brain maps it so that you can automatically pull it based on letter strings and patterns. Um, when we know that this process occurs and this is how we eventually attend to text, we know that kids need to learn the phonics, they need to learn the sound structures, they need to attach that to the spellings, and they need to practice that. And so, in saying that, kids need to be practicing using the phonics skills. And one of the best, most effective ways is by using decodable text or decodable books. So, all of this being said, which decodable books do I need? Again, like I said, we're not going to be talking about which series you need, because I think there are lots of options right now, which again, I'm so pleased about um, because it's such an effective resource. Um, but we're going to be talking about the mechanics, the scope and sequence, sight words, format, and the 3Ds, which I will get to. So the mechanics are the things that you're looking at in decodable books when you're looking to find this series or multiple series that fit you, are the phonics, the sight words, and the format. So in the phonics, we're talking about the regular sound spellings, the pieces that you're teaching kids. Now it might eventually be an irregular one, but that's much further on. Then sight words are the irregular sound spelling. So it's words that we maybe map out for kids. We'll talk about that later. Um, but it's words that don't are spelled in a way that aren't often spelled. And the phonic structures that have yet to be learned. So an example would be that in step 2, when we're teaching short vowels and blends, we use the word see, S-E-E. It has a vowel team, which isn't taught until step 5. But in order to make sense and make an interesting story, we pull that one in and it's something that we identify. I might even introduce what that phonics is, but I'm not expecting children to remember. And then format. Now, this is really where I say this really depends on the specific child we're talking about. So, we're talking about age, we're talking about interest, we're talking about um, maybe neurological needs. So, overstimulation, visual overstimulation, or if a child, you know, can read lots of text at once, but just doesn't have the phonics capabilities. So, this really depends on the specific child that we're talking about. The magical key to any decodable book, though, is the scope and sequence. You can ask any company for the scope and sequence of their book, and it'll be either a document or a set of documents, and it'll explain what is included in those books or how you would find what book fits the needs of your child or your students. So here, and these are all different companies. Every single one has, a very specific set of instructions on what is in those steps of books or levels of books or whatever, however they phases is one of the ways we explain it. But so that you know what needs to have been taught or needs to be identified before a child reads that book. This is from Align Decodable. So if I wanted to read the book I would look and see that these are the basic sound spellings that I need to have taught in order to do it. So if I'm currently working on short E, I'm not going to use this book, but if I'm working on A and I, this would be a great one. Then looking at dog on a log books, Nan Fam, we've got these sounds there. Now there are a lot of overlapping. I'll go back to this between here and here. So maybe I'm picking and choosing based on some other factors, be it interest or format, but I'm looking for, with that scope and sequence, the specific set that our kids need to know. So duck has a nest comes from our step 2, which means kids need to know all the basic sound spellings. And they also then need to be working with longer words. So step 2 for us has blends. There's no new sounds, but there's just more of them per word. So I might have 4 or 5 phonemes in a word, 5, 6, but they're all the basic sound spellings. So a child needs to know everything that's in green here, as well as be working on what's in yellow. And this is a much more in-depth view from our in-depth scope and sequence. And so kids need to have known that whole alphabet, but they need to be working on ending blends and double letter blends. I know I'm going to get the question, why is CK a double letter blend? In our program, we talk about it acting, behaving like a double letter blend because C and K make the same basic sound. So it's just like LL, we only say it one time. Then here with phonics books, just to show you another example, when I'm looking at this book 4, I'm looking at the suffix ed. We need to have worked with multiple phonemes and the short vowels and all of the basic letter sounds. So once you start understanding how to look at these scope and sequence and how to kind of identify, okay, what have I taught in my class and how does it attach to this, it becomes easier, although it looks daunting at first. When we talk about sight words, so the general definition is words that can be read upon sight. So something that's super automatic, that you read accurately every time. This is a general description. In decodable books and in programs a lot, sight words are irregular sound spellings, like I said before, or the phonic structures that have not yet been learned. Um, so it'll be the words that we need to know on sight or that we cannot use our skill set to decode. And this is, of course, all words want to be sight words. We want to have mapped and stored and be accurate and automatic with all words. Sight words can have multiple different meanings, but really when we're looking at a decodable book, it's the ones that our kids can't use their skills to decode. So any program you look at here, we've got Align Decodables, Whole Phonics, You Can Reading, all of them have a way that they talk about these kinds of words. They might call it something different. We've got high frequency words because high frequency are words that you see a lot, which makes sense. And then you've got, I like this, the out of sequence words. So those skills haven't been taught yet. And then we have sight words. So every program will have a way to show you what that is. And that's another characteristic in decodable books that's important is that we are identifying for kids before they read a book what it is that they cannot use their skills to read. In our program, we use sticky words. So, because it's a word that you get stuck on and it's on the very first page. So kids read it or we point it out to them before they ever even get into that book. Um, in a sense, too, we're trying to help kids be confident by saying, you have the skills to read this book, but not these words yet. So it's okay. We're giving them the the grace that they deserve when they're coming across something that we haven't taught them the skills to decode. Um, and so you'll see in a more in-depth scope and sequence, we identify the words that you need to know in order to read these books. And you'll see with a lot of programs, a lot of these sight words, sticky words, high frequency words that are used in the early books repeat. So we're helping kids to see that again and again and again. And so although we've helped identify what's irregular about it, they're having more practice with those words. Now, when I talk about format, this is the more subjective side of it. So, one of the pieces might be the number of words. How many words are on a page? If you get children that are overwhelmed super easily or at the beginning of their journey, we want to make sure that there aren't as many words per page. The reason being, not only can they be successful with a page rather quickly, um, seeing, having a less abstract experience with phonics. So they're using what they know, they've accomplished a page. Also, it helps as far as length of sentence because if it is laborious for you to decode a word or a lot of words, it will take you a long time to get through that sentence. And so the meaning gets lost. It's harder to provide meaning when you're decoding every single word. So the less that there are, the better in that case. Now, then these are three great series that are oftentimes used with older readers because their ability to look at more text and approach more text or needing continued practice with a certain phonics skill set, but not needing it in a way that's for a young child anymore. So this has more words, and you need to decide whether your kids are at the stage where they need less on a page or more on a page. So these all have the same similar phonics, but they are just done in different formats. You need to look at picture location. So, in some books, you'll see it being on an opposite page, or you'll see it being on a page where you can't even see the picture yet. Um, and sometimes you'll see it very distinguished beneath the text or above the text, but not within it. I do think that it can be difficult when a child is struggling to read or just beginning to do it, to have it be embedded in the picture. I remember when I was early in my teaching and I was trying to find decodable books, and the decodable books, some of the ones that I did find, the writing was within the picture and very, very tiny. And it makes it very difficult for the kids to pick out the actual phonics they're supposed to be practicing if they're searching for the words. This is great. This is a decodable graphic novel. This is this, I would say, would be format when you're deciding upon interest level. Now, we have a lot of kids who stay within a certain realm of phonics for a long time, or maybe have really high abilities in other areas and are still just struggling with a specific set of phonics. How do we get their attention? They don't want to feel like something is silly or too easy. And so something like this is great because you're engaging kids in something that's a lot like a comic book. Um, and allowing them to approach reading in a different way. So, the basic, which decodable books do I need? We look at what phonics structures and sight words have they already learned? Has a child or your class or your students already learned? Then we put in, we're focused, the current focus is on what they're currently practicing. So a lot of that is going to be what they're currently practicing. I might not put a ton new sight words that they're practicing, but a couple. And then we really need to slow our roll when we get to the ones that they haven't learned yet. So just to show, if we're looking at this same scope and sequence, I'm sorry this looks a little confusing, but it's three of the same scope and sequence. I'm going to put in a lot of what they already know because in that way I'm scaffolding, I'm allowing a lot of practice, I'm allowing them to continue to feel successful by practicing what they have already learned and then including a couple things that are going to make them slow down a bit. They're probably going to take them a little bit longer, but I'm not going to put in a lot of what they don't know yet. It's going to cause failure and undue stress, really. It's like let's say I've said it, and I know a lot of people have said it actually. It's like riding a bike. So I'm not going to put my kid that has just learned how to sit on a bike, I'm not going to put them on that bike and shove them without training wheels and say, go. I'm going to slowly work my way into it. And I'm going to give them the help that they need to get to moving fast on their own. So here's the 3Ds. This is just kind of a fun little way that I describe some of it. When you're looking at decodable books, you look at decodability. So basically the scope and sequence, how decodable is this for my students, for this group of students, for my child, and then depth. So really looking, does it make sense? I read a phonics book the other day with my son. He's a struggling reader going into second grade, and the storyline didn't make any sense. And I really struggled with helping him to feel like he was successful with actual reading because the story was kind of nonsense. So really looking to make sure that the stories make sense, that you can giggle or laugh or have a conversation or something of that sort with that story. Because all reading doesn't, I mean, just because it's decodable doesn't mean it needs to be plain or simple, too simple. And delight. Will they like it? So you've got your books that have kids in them. Maybe they identify with some of the kids. They really like the story. They follow a certain child. Ours have animals, so we're really focusing on the personality traits, and maybe they like a specific animal, or like I showed you earlier, the graphic decodable graphic novel. How do we engage kids in reading? Because all just because we're saying it's decodable doesn't mean it needs to be boring, especially now. This is the great part about what's happening right now in education is that so many people are coming out with series of books. So now I have my decodable books. Now what? Um, a lot of these topics are going to be covered in future webinars. So I'm going to go over them right now and kind of give a bit of suggestion, but we'll go over them, identify more about them later. We will talk about pre-reading and the basic uses. So pre-reading, what I always say about decodable books is there are a couple things you need to do, whether you are just looking at it yourself, whether you are preparing it for a small group or reading even with just your child at home. You need to see what the phonics are in it. Can I use that? Can I talk to my kids about it? Can I use it in a lesson? You need to look at the sight words. So which words do I need to identify before? Do some of them match what this child or these students have already learned? And also vocabulary words, because vocabulary does not just mean long words. It does not mean that you are only learning, 10 syllable words. It can be the different uses of one specific word. It changes the meaning of sentences we read. So by using every book we come across to help our kids with language acquisition, we're just helping them be that much more successful. So with the phonics, I would look at, like, this is a sneaky ebook. I would look at long I. How do we spell it? What words is it in? I would make sure that either my lesson or my review lesson came before this book, or if this is a practice book, it's something that that child has already been reading with for a while. Um, and using picking those words out, because the more times that we can ask kids to scan a text for a specific phonics structure, the more they start to recognize it. So they start to look for it. And if it's one that they have just learned, this is great because we're helping them identify what it looks like, see it again, use it in a word, making it less abstract. So the looking at this one, sorry, looking at the simple words books, looking at blends, taking a book that has maybe a couple different phonics that that child has worked with already, identifying what those are, having kids write those words, using them in dictation, but making sure that we're focusing on the phonics in the book. Sight words, obviously we talked about, whether it's high frequency words, out of sequence words, sight words, helping kids identify what are going to be the words, maybe even mapping those words. So showing them what word, like here we use puts. Well, those all make the sound that their most basic sound, but the U says so it's off. But if I identify that for kids, they start to see that when they look at this word. Um, Obviously, when kids will get to this, a lot of times they'll say putts, which is correct, and I'll say to a child, "That's correct. You're right. That is exactly how it should sound." Unfortunately, it's not how it sounds, and this is why. And then vocabulary words. So here I've shown you an example that has two words that are actually very simple words. But if a child doesn't have a large vocabulary of their own, or if they are building theirs, by identifying words that have multiple meanings behind them, well, trip, there's multiple ways for each of those to be used. By previewing a couple of words that you've looked through the book, defining those words, saying, what does it mean? What is the actual definition? Can it be used more than one way? Is there more than one meaning? And then segmenting or decoding those words. We also, I would say, after the book, if you are in a educational setting, maybe not at home, in the sense that not as like when you're enjoying listening to your child read or show you what they know. Having children write those words, using that word after the fact. There are many basic uses for decodable books: small groups, differentiated instruction, shared reading, home to school connections, book bins and practice spaces, and decodable libraries. So we'll start with small groups. We are having a webinar. This is our next one. Um, but skills-based reading instruction. So I know a lot of teachers in what is happening in education when we're saying we're moving to more of the skill-based reading instruction. That doesn't mean that you can't have these small groups where you get to have more time with specific kids. There's a more personal attention. You have the opportunity for informal assessment by listening to your kids reading, by interacting with them immediately when they need that feedback, and by using books that they themselves read in groups that are doing shared reading comprehension and activities, and all of the things that we identify with a small group. But we can do that using a decodable book and put an emphasis on the specific skills that those kids are working on. Differentiated instruction. This can mean multiple things. We are having, again, another webinar on this one. It can be using, uh, just like we were talking about in small groups, it can be having multiple small groups that have a different a different book used in a different set of skills in each one. It can be using books at different skill levels for the same use. So if maybe I am talking about opinion and I want the kids to all go read and write a piece about their opinion, and we're talking about personal feelings. I mean, I'm just giving an example, but I would give each child a book that they themselves could actually read and then do the activity. So differentiating various activities based on what that child can read or that set of kids can read, um, using it for different reasons. So I might use, like, here are two books: the Rex Runs Off series and Hot Chips Mad Fish. They both have basic phonics, but they're two different kinds. So I would be using these in two different ways. I would differentiate based on the type of activity that I would use it for, but it might have the same skill set. Something like sortagories, which I feel lucky enough they're going to be involved with our differentiated instruction webinar, using decodable text to help kids at various levels, because we all know that our classrooms are not uniform. If if they were, this would be a lot easier. We would be having a lot less of these conversations. Being in a classroom, uh, it, we all know how important it is to meet our kids where they are at, and obviously to push them and help them take safe risks, but to help them from where they are, and especially after the pandemic, the levels are they vary so greatly in a lot of our younger grades, that we really need to be um, aware and cognizant of utilizing these materials in different ways to meet all those needs. The basic uses for shared reading. So shared reading is, I mean, I think it's essential if you are in classes, even at home, because shared reading can be experiences that you have in the home, whether you're reading to your stuffed animals or you're reading to your pet or, to grandma over there, whatever it might be. When you have shared reading experiences, whether you're reading with somebody or you're reading to somebody, it allows for fluency practice. It allows for becoming confident with what you can do. Oftentimes, it helps with comprehension because as you become more fluent, you can attend more to the meaning than the mechanics. There's whisper reading, so reading out loud to yourself, or maybe whisper reading with a partner. You'll see one of the examples here. This one of an amazing teacher I know does flashlight Fridays, and they use flashlights to read the words, the finger lights. But there's ways to work with partners where you're having fun with reading, but in different um, a- applying it differently. Um, and because I think one of the things that I know that I relied heavily on as a teacher was drop everything and read. It was the more we could get kids to read, the more access they had to text, the better readers they would be. Unfortunately, again, when we talk about silent reading, um, if a child is struggling to read or they are just learning, they are then just doing it silently. So we need to give them experiences where there's someone else attending to what they're doing. They're getting to read out loud, but maybe not in a scary situation like in front of the entire class. Maybe they're reading to a stuffed animal and I can listen. Shared reading experiences are incredibly important. We will go over that in both the small group instruction and differentiated instruction. Home to school connections. This is so important, and we are having a webinar for parents. This will be included. It's for educators who are supporting parents and for parents. But using activities like these dog on a log printables, using activities that go along with a specific skill set that the child is reading a book and then playing a game. It helps parents to understand, the purpose of using what the kids are learning in class. Um, I've got a bookmark here that helps parents to understand the ways that we approach words that we don't know. How how do we move forward when we see a word that we get stuck on? Or whether it be like take home books. So I know a lot of teachers that actually have a library set up where they have baggies and they send home the actual decodable books. Sending home decodable books is extremely effective because when we work as a team with parents or caregivers, we're we're allowing kids to we're giving them the same message that reading does have to do with the words, and we're being consistent. And a lot of us know, whether it's from being an educator or being a parent, that consistency matters for kids. It gives a message and it secures it. So if we're helping our parents either to pick out these books or we're sending them home, then our kids have the opportunity to not only be excited about what they're learning by showing their success, but continue to practice the skills that they're going to need for the rest of their academic career. Book bins or practice spaces. So, and decodable libraries. Again, another webinar. I'm really excited. We'll get to have Beth Bevers from the Literacy Hub. She's going to help us out to understand some of what happens with her library and why that happens. But there are ways to organize books. I mean, we get these books, and now what? Now what do I do? Do I keep them in the box? Do I hand them out to kids? What can I do? I've given a couple examples here, but one of them was a take home library. So it was book bags, and the teacher used index cards and explained what the skill was. And, we have sheets. So during that webinar, we're going to give you lots of take homes that you can send home with parents and ways to organize. There's a couple incredible foundations who are trying to help public libraries or schools, one of which being Teach My Kid to Read, Making the Road to Decode. Um, But once you have those books, organizing them can be a little bit overwhelming. Some people do it by first by publisher and then by skill set, or if you can find a way to merge them. So you've got, if the scope and sequence are similar. So let's say you pick 3 series that have a similar scope and sequence, then you can divide it up by the skill set. Um, and the book bins or private spaces, I will say, I know that a lot of schools still, you have a book bin for a child, and I think this is great. There's a set of books that the kids can go grab that are fitting to them. Just to tell you kind of a personal story, my son came home at the beginning of the year, and he knew all of his basic letter sounds and CBC words, and he'd been working very hard. And he said, "Mama, well, because I can't read." And I said, "What are you talking about? Of course you can read. It's just specific words." "Well, I can't read any of the books in my class or in my bin." There is a difference if there are books that are available for kids to look at, to explore, to enjoy, or books that are being required to be read. So required for practice. So if you've got a book bin and it just has books that are all interest, I used to love all those books with little labels and little boxes on the side that explain the pictures. I mean, whatever it might be that your kids are into or excite them, put them in there. They like snakes. They got a lot of books with snakes in them. Maybe they want to look at the pictures. Maybe they know some of the words, but it's very clear that these are not books that you need to practice reading in, because some of the words are more complex phonics structures that you'll learn later. But if you're going to have a book bin that they must read, really looking into decodable books, you're not only helping those kids feel confident, but you're showing them that they have a part in the literacy that's happening in your classroom. So it's very important. Obviously, you can tell it's slightly personal for me, but we will go over more of that in the webinar on decodable libraries. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope that you've gotten something from it. I hope that I was general enough that you have an idea of how to get started, or if you've already started, please reach out to us if you ever have any questions. I do want to say thank you to all of the incredible authors that put in to this webinar, and the ones that are coming in the series. There are a lot of, like I said, parents, educators, teachers, um, some of the same, a lot of people who are creating these books because they know how important this practice is. So even though we are still hopeful that more research is going to come out, we're doing the best with what we know, and we know that kids need to learn the phonics, and they need to learn how to build and decode words, and in doing that, there's a lot of great authors out there putting together series and separate books. And so thank you to these. They will be on the website page that comes out with this webinar. There will be a quiz there that you can take and get a PD credit. It will send a message to us, and we will send you a certificate. So in the next day or two, that will go live on our website, but there will also be links to each one of these publishers. So if you saw something there that you like, or you saw something that feels like it would fit you or your students, please make sure to check it out. And we're just so excited. We're so excited to have you all. I'm sorry, I'm looking at a question. We did have one question about the the decodable graphic novel. That was Sue Marisculo. She has 2 of them out now, and the link that we'll provide is to Amazon. But Hot Chips and Mad Fish is the one that we're showing right here. So, but please, if you see something and I haven't explained it, or I haven't given you direction, please go ahead and contact us. So this is I'm gonna oh, I apologize. I did explain this a little more. We're gonna have the website. We're gonna have a quiz that you can take. We're also gonna give you the printable quiz. So if you wanna look over the video again and make sure you get all those answers, although they won't be too difficult. And then we're going to have the rest of our series. It is all up on our website right now. You can register for any of those. And here's a QR code, so you feel free to scan for free samples of the Express Readers books, which you can also find on our website. A lot of places will give you free samples. It's a great way to check out what books fit you and what you like. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it, you taking the time to learn more about this resource, as it really is truly essential and effective for our kiddos.